You know what's funny? Society has this weird obsession with noise. If someone's not talking, they're weird. If they're not posting every thought on social media, they're hiding something. If they prefer their own company over a crowded room, well, clearly there's something wrong with them. People think they're boring. They have nothing to say. They're just sitting there doing nothing. But what if I told you that while others are out there chasing the next conversation, the next party, the next social high, introverts are building entire universes in their minds? Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in psychology, discovered that introverts aren't the quiet, awkward people society makes them out to be. They're actually operating on a completely different level of consciousness, a level so deep, so rich, so intensely personal that most people will never, and I mean never, get invited in. Here's the thing. Society doesn't want people to know. That person sitting quietly in the corner isn't broken. They're not shy. They're not boring. They're doing something most people are terrified to do. They're actually thinking. Deep, complex, meaningful thinking that goes way beyond what movie to watch or what restaurant to try next. But here's where it gets interesting. Jung discovered that introverts naturally turn their attention towards something extroverts often overlook, what he called the collective unconscious, a realm of symbols, archetypes, and universal truths that exists within all of us, but requires inner focus to explore. And society? Society calls this boring. Jung knew better. Let's clear something up right now. When Carl Jung talked about introversion, he wasn't talking about some kid hiding behind their mom's leg at a party. He wasn't describing social anxiety or fear of public speaking. Jung was describing something far more profound and far more powerful. Jung saw introverts as people who draw their energy from within. Think about that for a second. While extroverts are running around like phones with dying batteries, desperately plugging into other people to recharge, introverts have their own internal power source. They don't need others to feel alive. They don't need external validation to know who they are. Jung observed that introverts direct their attention toward inner thoughts, ideas, and reflection, rather than seeking constant external stimulation. While others are talking about the weather, many introverts find themselves connecting dots between dreams they had last week and a book they read 3 months ago. While others are gossiping about who said what to whom, introverts often explore the deeper patterns that govern human behavior. What looks like quiet from the outside is often an intense inner dialogue. But here's what's wild. Society has convinced people that if someone's not talking, they're not thinking. If they're not sharing every thought that pops into their head, they must not have any thoughts worth sharing. What a load of... The introvert sitting silently isn't empty. They're often full, so full of ideas, insights, and observations that they're carefully selecting which ones are worth bringing into the outside world. They're not quiet because they have nothing to say. They may be quiet because they're processing complex thoughts that don't easily translate to small talk. And that's where the real story begins. People want to know what's really happening in an introvert's mind. They're often building complex inner landscapes while others are focused on external activities. Jung discovered something that completely changed how we understand human consciousness. He found that deep in our minds, deeper than our personal thoughts and memories, there's a layer of universal symbols and patterns. He called these archetypes. Think of archetypes as the basic building blocks of human experience. The hero's journey, the pattern of leaving comfort, facing challenges, and returning transformed. The wise old man, the mental figure who offers guidance and knowledge. The shadow, the hidden, rejected parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge. The mother, the nurturing, protective force that gives life and comfort. The trickster, the rule breaker who brings change through chaos and humor. These aren't just stories. They're the fundamental patterns that Jung believes shape how we understand ourselves and our world. And here's what Jung observed. Introverts tend to spend more time exploring these inner symbols and patterns. While extroverts are busy engaging with the external world, introverts often find themselves drawn to understanding the deeper meanings behind their experiences. They naturally gravitate toward connecting dreams, fantasies, and daily events into personal significance. This tendency creates what could be called a rich, symbolic inner life, one that others may rarely see. Picture this. An introvert comes home from a regular day at work. To others, they just had a normal day. But in their mind, they might be processing how their boss's behavior connected to certain patterns they've observed. They could be reflecting on how their response revealed something about their own character. They may be seeing connections in their relationships that remind them of stories or themes they have encountered. They're not just living their life. They're often weaving the narrative threads of their existence. And most people don't realize this depth of inner processing is possible. They think life is just stuff that happens. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. But many introverts have discovered that every moment can contain layers of meaning, symbols waiting to be decoded, patterns waiting to be recognized, insights waiting to be extracted. But here's where it gets really interesting. Society has sold everyone a lie. The lie that more is better, more friends, more experiences, more conversations, more everything. Jung saw through this assumption. He observed that introverts often approach life differently than extroverts. Jung noted their tendency to prefer knowing deeply about fewer things rather than skimming the surface of many topics. They often gravitate toward a few meaningful relationships rather than dozens of casual acquaintances. Introverts often prefer depth over breadth in their approach to life. Think about the difference. An extrovert might go to 5 parties in a weekend, have dozens of surface-level conversations, collect phone numbers like trading cards, and feel energized by the variety. They're sampling life like it's a buffet. An introvert often gravitates toward one profound conversation that shifts their perspective. They'd rather spend 3 hours talking to one person about consciousness, meaning, purpose, love, fear, the big questions, the stuff that actually resonates with them, the stuff that many people are too distracted to explore deeply. This selective approach can create richness, and this is where something beautiful happens. Because when someone is selective, when they choose quality over quantity, their inner landscape often becomes more complex and nuanced, like the difference between a shallow pond and the ocean. One reflects the surface, the other contains depths we're still discovering. Their boring evenings alone often involve activities that feed their inner world. While others are scrolling social media for quick stimulation, many introverts are reading books or watching things that challenge their thinking. While others are binge-watching shows, introverts might be writing in journals or creating something meaningful. While others are at clubs filling time with noise and lights, introverts could be creating art, music, or ideas, stuff that has lasting value. But here's what society doesn't tell people. Those quiet activities, they're often building something substantial. Every book they read becomes part of their internal reference system. Every journal entry becomes part of their ongoing self-reflection. Every creative work becomes a bridge between their inner world and external expression. And what happens when someone builds something this rich, this complex, this deep? Jung had a term for what he considered the most important psychological journey a person can take. He called it individuation, and it's something that requires what many people struggle with: solitude. Jung's concept of individuation is about becoming one's authentic self. Not the self parents wanted, not the self society expects, not the self friends need them to be, the actual person beneath all the external expectations. And Jung observed that this process often unfolds in solitude. Think about it. How can someone figure out who they really are when they're constantly surrounded by other people's opinions, expectations, and energies? How can they hear their own inner voice when external voices are always competing for attention? Jung suggested they often can't, and introverts seem to intuitively understand this. While extroverts might feel uncomfortable being alone with their thoughts, introverts often embrace solitude. They understand that quiet time isn't empty. It can be incredibly productive. It's where self-discovery happens. Jung wrote about the importance of integrating one's shadow. Jung discovered that everyone has a shadow, the parts of ourselves we'd rather not acknowledge: our anger, our selfishness, our petty jealousies, our difficult impulses. Most people spend their lives avoiding their shadow, projecting it onto others, pretending it doesn't exist. But Jung observed that psychological health requires acknowledging these shadow aspects. Introverts, in their natural tendency towards self-reflection, often find themselves confronting these uncomfortable truths about themselves. This process, while challenging, can lead to greater self-awareness and authenticity. Through solitude, they often discover what they actually value and believe. Away from the pressure to conform, many introverts discover their genuine preferences, values, and goals. Not what they're supposed to want, but what resonates with their authentic self. To them, solitude isn't empty. It's often where self-discovery happens. Like an artist working in their studio, they use quiet time to craft their identity. Every moment of reflection can be another step toward understanding who they really are beneath social expectations. And here's what's remarkable about this process. While society runs around trying to find themselves through external experiences, travel, relationships, career changes, spiritual retreats, many introverts have discovered that authentic self-knowledge often comes from within. They develop themselves from the inside out, but this creates something even more profound. Here's something many people don't realize about how some introverts experience reality. They don't just live life, they often reflect deeply on it, like readers analyzing a complex novel full of themes and deeper meanings. While others see events as just events, many introverts naturally look for patterns, meanings, and connections. They often ask, what can this teach me? How does this connect to other experiences? What does this reveal about life or human nature? Many introverts tend to process experiences as opportunities for insight and learning. Think about what this means. When an introvert faces rejection for a job, they might not just think, that's disappointing. They could explore, what does this experience teach me about resilience? How does this connect to my relationship with success and failure? What can I learn about myself from my reaction? When they experience love, they don't just feel the emotions. They might reflect, what does this relationship reveal about my capacity for connection? How does this experience connect to universal patterns of human bonding? What is this teaching me about vulnerability? This tendency can make their inner life feel like an ongoing story of growth and discovery. Every day potentially becomes material for reflection. Every challenge might become a learning opportunity. Every success could become a moment for deeper self-understanding. Every relationship might become a mirror for self-discovery. They're not just experiencing life randomly, they're often consciously learning from it. While extroverts might focus on accumulating experiences, introverts often focus on extracting meaning from experiences. This is the difference between consuming life and digesting it. Extroverts tend to accumulate experiences, party, travel, meet people, try new things, but then often move quickly to the next experience. Introverts often digest their experiences more thoroughly. They take them in, reflect on them, extract insights, and integrate them into their evolving understanding of themselves and the world. One approach gives people breadth of experience. The other approach often gives depth of understanding. And this depth of reflection can allow someone to navigate life with greater self-awareness and intentionality, instead of just moving from one experience to the next without deeper consideration. But here's where things get really interesting. What happens when someone builds this reflective, meaningful inner world? Jung recognized something that makes sense when you think about it. If someone spent years building something precious, wouldn't they be careful about who they let near it? If they created a private space filled with their most important thoughts, would they open it to everyone who showed casual interest? If they cultivated a garden of their deepest insights, would they let anyone wander through without care? Probably not. And Jung observed that introverts often naturally protect their inner world. Think about what they've potentially built through years of reflection. Carefully developed thoughts, hard-won insights, a personal understanding of life that connects their experiences into a coherent worldview, relationships with ideas, books, and concepts that have shaped who they are. They often don't share this inner world casually, which can make them appear reserved. And this is where society often misunderstands them. Society sees their selectiveness and might call it coldness. Society sees their boundaries and might call it unfriendliness. Society sees their protection of what's meaningful to them and might call it boring. But here's what's often really happening. They're being discerning about who gets access to what matters most to them. When someone has built something genuinely valuable, something that took years of reflection, reading, and inner work to develop, they naturally become protective of it. Not because they're mean or selfish, but because they understand its worth to them. It's like the difference between someone with a casual book collection and someone with a carefully curated library. The casual reader might lend books to anyone because they're easily replaceable. But someone who has spent decades building a meaningful collection, they know the value of what they have. They understand how easily things can be damaged or lost. They recognize that not everyone will appreciate what they've carefully gathered. Introverts are often careful curators of their inner world. But here's what can be beautiful. When they do open that inner world, people often discover something remarkable. When an introvert finally shares their real thoughts, when they trust someone enough to reveal their deeper insights, their personal philosophy, their way of seeing the world, that person often discovers something extraordinary. They discover a mind that has been actively working on life's bigger questions, not just reacting to daily events, but actually exploring fundamental questions. Who am I? What does it mean to live well? How should I respond to suffering? What is my purpose? How do I become authentic? How do I create something meaningful? They discover someone who has been in dialogue with great ideas and thinkers. Their inner world often isn't just their own thoughts. It's informed by conversations with philosophers, writers, and thinkers across history. They may have been learning from Marcus Aurelius about resilience, from various wisdom traditions about meaning, from psychological thinkers about understanding themselves. They discover someone who often notices patterns and connections others might miss. Through years of reflection and observation, they may see the world with particular depth. They notice things. They understand nuances. They recognize patterns that others might not see. And people often realize the person they thought was quiet has been living a remarkably rich inner life. So here's a question worth considering. Who's living more fully? The person who fills every moment with external stimulation, or the person who has the patience to sit with their thoughts and develop real insights? The person who needs constant activity to feel alive, or the person who has built an internal world rich enough to sustain them? The person who knows all the latest trends but little about themselves, or the person who has spent years on the journey of self-understanding? The person who avoids being alone with their thoughts, or the person who has made friends with solitude? Jung understood something that society often misses. The quiet ones aren't necessarily empty. They may be remarkably full. They're not necessarily boring. They may be building something meaningful. They're not necessarily cold. They may simply be selective. They're not necessarily unsocial. They may just prefer quality over quantity. And perhaps instead of trying to drag them into a world of surface-level interactions, people might consider what they could learn from their approach to life. Because here's what becomes clear when you study Jung's work. The people with the richest inner lives are often the most selective about sharing them. The people with the deepest insights are often the most careful about who they trust with those insights. And the people who seem quiet on the surface may be living extraordinarily thoughtful lives underneath. Jung spent his career studying human consciousness, and what he discovered was revolutionary. The real adventure isn't necessarily in the external world of constant activity and social stimulation. Much of the real adventure happens in the infinite landscape of inner reflection and growth. And introverts, they're often the natural explorers of this inner territory. While others are documenting their external adventures, introverts may be mapping the territories of consciousness and self-understanding. While others are collecting experiences, introverts are often collecting insights and wisdom. While others are trying to impress people with what they've done, introverts may be more focused on who they're becoming. So So the next time someone sees a person sitting quietly, not jumping into every conversation, not competing for attention, they might consider that this person isn't necessarily doing nothing. They might be doing some of the most important work there is, working on understanding themselves, working on developing authentic self-knowledge, working on building something that external circumstances can't destroy because it exists entirely within their own consciousness. And if someone proves themselves thoughtful and trustworthy, maybe that introvert will share what they have discovered. Maybe they'll offer a glimpse into the cathedral of thought they've been constructing in quiet moments. Maybe they'll share some of the insights they've gathered from years of reflection. Maybe they'll invite them into the rich inner world that most people never get to see, but it's something that has to be earned through genuine interest and respect. Because the most valuable things in life, the deepest insights, the most authentic connections, the richest understanding, aren't given away casually. They're shared with people who recognize their worth. And Jung understood this. Many introverts understand this instinctively. The question is, does the rest of the world? So keep thinking deeply, keep reflecting honestly, keep building your inner world, keep protecting what matters to you, keep being exactly who you are. And most importantly, keep being amazing, my friends.